The Roman Empire. Setting the stage. As Rome enlarged its territory, its republican form of government grew increasingly unstable. Eventually, the Roman Republic gave way to the formation of a mighty dictator-ruled empire that continued to spread Rome's influence far and wide. The Republic collapses. Rome's increasing wealth and expanding boundaries brought many problems. The most serious were growing discontent among the lower classes of society and a breakdown in military order. These problems led to a shakeup of the Republic and the emergence of a new political system. Economic turmoil. As Rome grew, the gap between rich and poor grew wider. Many of Rome's rich landowners lived on huge estates. Thousands of enslaved persons, many of whom had been captured peoples in various wars, were forced to work on these estates. By 100 BC, enslaved persons formed perhaps one-third of Rome's population. Small farmers found it difficult to compete with the large estates run by the labor of enslaved people. Many of these farmers were former soldiers. A large number of them sold their lands to wealthy landowners and became homeless and jobless. Most stayed in the countryside and worked as seasonal migrant laborers. Some headed to Rome and other cities looking for work. They joined the ranks of the urban poor, a group that totaled about one-fourth of Roman society. Two brothers, Tiberius and Gaius Gracchus, attempted to help Rome's poor. As tribunes, they proposed such reforms as limiting the size of estates and giving land to the poor. The brothers made enemies of numerous senators who felt threatened by their ideas. Both met violent deaths, Tiberius in 133 BC and Gaius in 121 BC. A period of civil war, or conflict between groups within the same country, followed their deaths. Military upheaval. Adding to the growing turmoil within the Republic was a breakdown of the once loyal military. As the Republic grew more unstable, generals began seizing greater power for themselves. They recruited soldiers from the landless poor by promising them land. These soldiers fought for pay and owed allegiance only to their commander. They replaced the citizen soldiers whose loyalty had been to the Republic. It now was possible for a military leader supported by his own troops to take over by force. Eventually, one would do just that. Julius Caesar takes control. In 60 BC, a military leader named Julius Caesar joined forces with Crassus, a wealthy Roman, and Pompey, a popular general. With their help, Caesar was elected consul in 59 BC. For the next 10 years, these men dominated Rome as a triumvirate, a group of 3 rulers. Caesar was a strong leader and a genius at military strategy. Following tradition, he served only 1 year as consul. He then appointed himself governor of Gaul, now France. During 58 to 50 BC, Caesar led his legions in a grueling but successful campaign to conquer all of Gaul. Because he shared fully in the hardships of war, he won his men's loyalty and devotion. The reports of Caesar's successes in Gaul made him very popular with the people of Rome. Pompey, who had become his political rival, feared Caesar's ambitions. In 50 BC, the Senate, at Pompey's urgings, ordered Caesar to disband his legions and return home. Caesar defied the Senate's order. On the night of January 10, 49 BC, he took his army across the Rubicon River in Italy, the southern limit of the area he commanded. He marched his army swiftly toward Rome, and Pompey fled. Caesar's troops defeated Pompey's armies in Greece, Asia, Spain, and Egypt. In 46 BC, Caesar returned to Rome, where he had the support of the army and the masses. That same year, the Senate appointed him dictator. In 44 BC, he was named dictator for life. Caesar's reforms. Caesar governed as an absolute ruler, one who has total power. However, he started a number of reforms. He granted Roman citizenship to many people in the provinces. He expanded the Senate, adding friends and supporters from Italy and other regions. Caesar also helped the poor by creating jobs, especially through the construction of new public buildings. He started colonies where people without land could own property, and he increased pay for soldiers. Many nobles and senators expressed concern over Caesar's growing power, success, and popularity. Some feared losing their influence. Others considered him a tyrant. A number of important senators, led by Marcus Brutus and Gaius Cassius, plotted his assassination. On March 15, 44 BC, they stabbed him to death in the Senate chamber, beginning of the empire. After Caesar's death, civil war broke out again and destroyed what was left of the Roman Republic. 3 of Caesar's supporters banded together to crush the assassins. Caesar's 18-year-old grandnephew and adopted son Octavian joined, with an experienced general named Mark Antony and a powerful politician named Lepidus. In 43 BC, they took control of Rome and ruled for 10 years as the Second Triumvirate. Their alliance, however, ended in jealousy and violence. Octavian forced Lepidus to retire. He and Mark Antony then became rivals. While leading troops against Rome's enemies in Anatolia, Mark Antony met Queen Cleopatra of Egypt. He fell in love with her and followed her to Egypt. Octavian accused Antony of plotting to rule Rome from Egypt, and another civil war erupted. Octavian defeated the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra at the naval battle of Actium in 31 BC. Later, Antony and Cleopatra committed suicide. While he restored some aspects of the Republic, Octavian became the unchallenged ruler of Rome. Eventually, he accepted the title of Augustus, or Exalted One. He also kept the title Imperator, or Supreme Military Commander, a term from which emperor is derived. Rome was now an empire ruled by one man. A vast and powerful empire, Rome was at the peak of its power from the beginning of Augustus's rule in 27 BC to AD 180. For 207 years, peace reigned throughout the empire, except for some fighting with tribes along the borders. This period of peace and prosperity is known as the Pax Romana, Roman peace. During this time, the Roman Empire included more than 3 million square miles. Its population numbered between 60 and 80 million people. About 1 million people lived in the city of Rome itself. A sound government. The Romans held their vast empire together in part through efficient government and able rulers. Augustus was Rome's ablest emperor. He stabilized the frontier, glorified Rome with splendid public buildings, and created a system of government that survived for centuries. He set up a civil service. That is, he paid workers to manage the affairs of government, such as the grain supply, tax collection, and the postal system. Although the Senate still functioned, civil servants drawn from plebeians and even former slaves actually administered the empire. After Augustus died in AD 14, the system of government that he established maintained the empire's stability. This was due mainly to the effectiveness of the civil service in carrying out day-to-day operations. The Romans managed to control an empire that by the 2nd century AD reached from Spain to Mesopotamia, from North Africa to Britain. Included in its provinces were people of many languages, cultures, and customs. Agriculture and trade. Agriculture was the most important industry in the empire. All else depended on it. About 90% of the people were engaged in farming. Most Romans survived on the produce from their local area. Additional food, when needed, and luxury items for the rich were obtained through trade. In Augustus's time, A silver coin called a denarius was in use throughout the empire. Having common coinage made trade between different parts of the empire much easier. Rome had a vast trading network. Ships from the east traveled the Mediterranean protected by the Roman navy. Cities such as Corinth in Greece, Ephesus in Anatolia, and Antioch on the eastern coast of the Mediterranean grew wealthy. Rome also traded with China and India. A complex network of roads linked the empire to such far-flung places as Persia and southern Russia. These roads were originally built by the Roman army for military purposes. Trade also brought Roman ways to the provinces and beyond the Roman world. Throughout its history, Rome emphasized the values of discipline, strength, and loyalty. A person with these qualities was said to have the important virtue of gravitas. The Romans were a practical people. They honored strength more than beauty, power more than grace, and usefulness more than elegance. Most people in the Roman Empire lived in the countryside and worked on farms. In Rome and smaller cities, merchants, soldiers, slaves, foreigners, and philosophers all shared the crowded, noisy streets. Here, people from all walks of life came together to create a diverse society. Slaves and captivity. Slavery was a significant part of Roman life. It was widespread and important to the economy. The Romans made more use of slaves than any previous civilization. Numbers of slaves may have reached as high as 1/3 of the total population. Most slaves were conquered peoples brought back by victorious Roman armies and included men, women, and children. Children born to slaves also became slaves. Slaves could be bought and sold. According to Roman law, slaves were the property of their owners. They could be punished, rewarded, set free, or put to death as their masters saw fit. Slaves worked both in the city and on the farm. Many were treated cruelly and worked at hard labor all day long. Some, strong, healthy males, were forced to become gladiators or professional fighters who fought to the death in public contests. Other slaves, particularly those who worked in wealthy households, were better treated. Occasionally, slaves would rebel. None of the slave revolts succeeded. More than 1 million slaves lost their lives attempting to gain their freedom. The earliest Romans worshipped powerful spirits or divine forces, called noumena, that they thought resided in everything around them. Closely related to these spirits were the lares, who were the guardian spirits of each family. They gave names to these powerful gods and goddesses and honored them through various rituals, hoping to gain favor and avoid misfortune. In Rome, government and religion were linked. The deities were symbols of the state. Romans were expected to honor them not only in private rituals at shrines in their homes, but also in public worship ceremonies conducted by priests in temples. Among the most important Roman gods and goddesses were Jupiter, father of the gods, Juno, his wife, who watched over women, and Minerva, goddess of wisdom and of the arts and crafts. During the empire, worship of the emperor also became part of the official religion of Rome. Society and culture. By the time of the empire, wealth and social status made huge differences in how people lived. Classes had little in common. The rich lived extravagantly. They spent large sums of money on homes, gardens, slaves, and luxuries. They gave banquets that lasted for many hours and included foods that were rare and costly, such as boiled ostrich and parrot-tongue pie. However, most people in Rome barely had the necessities of life. During the time of the empire, much of the city's population was unemployed. The government supported these people with daily rations of grain. In the shadow of Rome's great temples and public buildings, poor people crowded into rickety, sprawling tenements. Fire was a constant danger. To distract and control the masses of Romans, the government provided free games, races, mock battles, and gladiator contests. By AD 250, there were 150 holidays a year. On these days of celebration, the Colosseum, a huge arena that could hold 50,000, would fill with the rich and the poor alike. The spectacles they watched combined bravery and cruelty, honor and violence. In the animal shows, wild creatures brought from distant lands, such as tigers, lions, and bears, fought to the death. In other contests, gladiators engaged in combat with animals or with each other, often until one of them was killed. During this time of Pax Romana, another activity slowly emerged in the Roman Empire, the practice of a new religion known as Christianity. The early followers of this new faith would meet with much brutality and hardship for their beliefs. But their religion would endure and spread throughout the empire, and eventually become one of the dominant faiths of the world.